Welcome back to another episode of United for a Healthy Stoughton. Today our focus is underage drinking, and I have with me a special guest from the Norfolk Juvenile Court, and it is Teresa Plante, who is an Assistant Chief Probation Officer at the courthouse. So welcome, Teresa.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie.
Yeah. So Teresa's been with the coalition for a very long time, since OASIS was founded, actually. So I'm going to let her tell a little bit about how she got involved with the coalition and a little bit about probation, juvenile probation, for folks in the audience who don't know.
Great, thank you. I approximately maybe 11 years ago, we had a problem with some young girls using heroin in the town of Stoughton. And myself and some other people in the community knew there was something that we wanted to do to stop this problem. And it was the police department, the Stoughton Youth Commission, the schools, and we put together a assembly at Stoughton High School. And we had, at this assembly, we had several people on the panel, and we had Joanne Peterson, who is a mother whose child was a heroin addict, and she was on the panel as well. And from that, the Learn to Cope program started for parents of children with heroin addictions and opiate addictions. So we had this assembly, and it was very well received. We had, I think, maybe 75 people in the audience, which was great. And we knew that, and people learned a lot, and we felt like that was a good springboard, but we knew we wanted to do more. So we started this organization, OASIS, Organizing Against Substances in Stoughton, and we've been up and running for, this is our 11th year, is it, Steph?
Or more,
12, yes.
13, yeah.
Yes, so we've been around for a while, and we've kind of evolved from just the heroin prevention, which is still obviously an issue, but that we cover all substances now, and underage drinking is absolutely one of our major concerns.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit about juvenile probation and sort of your role over the years with sort of the role you took on with OASIS because of your role with the court?
Certainly. Again, as a probation officer, it's our job and our duty to promote public safety, to enforce court orders. But as juvenile probation officers, we really want to rehabilitate and help people and help kids. And although we're a juvenile court, we're concerned about kids, but also with families. We cover all different kinds of cases. We have delinquency cases, which is when a child under the age of 18 commits a crime. But we also have care and protection cases, and those are the abuse and neglect cases where parents they're either unable or unfit to take care of their children. And many of those parents are involved in substances, alcohol, and other substances that they have issues with. And the third kind of case that we handle is a CRA, which stands for Child Requiring Assistance, and that's a civil petition that a parent can come to the court. There's 5 different kinds of CRAs. There's a truancy petition, a habitual school offender petition, there's a runaway petition, which a parent or a police officer can come to the courthouse and file this petition if their child has run away from home. And the one that parents probably use the most is called a stubborn child petition. And that's when your child is between the age of 7 and 18 years old, and you have concerns that they're not obeying the lawful commands of the home. And quite often, probably more often than not, children have substance abuse issues, and they can come to the court looking for assistance and guidance with that.
Great. And we'll circle back to some of that stuff, because I think those are good tools for parents who are really struggling and stuck sometimes if the substance abuse stuff becomes more than a simple conversation with your kid.
Correct.
So let's talk a little about underage drinking. I feel like as a community, we've been spending a lot of time talking about marijuana. We've been talking a lot about opiates. These things have been in the news. Sometimes we forget that the number one drug that kids use is alcohol, which I'm sure you see in your cases.
All the time.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about some what we know about Stoughton. So I'm going to ask Jeff actually if he can pull up a couple of data slides for us. So what you're looking at here is when we think about Stoughton High School students and we ask them on surveys what drugs they've ever used in their life, you can see here that the top drug is alcohol. This is not unlike any other part of the country or any other part of the state. But the good news here actually that you'll see, even if we ask kids, have you ever had a drink of alcohol, more than a few sips, what they'll say to us, most of them still, it's close, but most of our kids have never actually had alcohol, even in high school, which is great. Why don't let's leave the data up for a second here. So the other thing we know, which isn't surprising, is if we look at what happens with kids using alcohol over their lifetime, at least the part of their lifetime that we can survey. We look at 6th through 12th graders, and you can see that alcohol use does trend up. So while it's true that on average, the average high school student, most of them haven't had alcohol, by the time they are in 12th grade, 70% of them have reported that they've had at least a drink. So it's really, really important, and when we talk about talking to your kids about alcohol, that that you have these conversations, because they certainly are going to be exposed to it. If they're not, they will at the very least know people who are drinking. Just one more for comparison. So this is a comparison slide with Stoughton in Massachusetts. So the good news, another piece of good news, is that we actually are doing really great with our alcohol use rates. We're trending way below the state, which I think is a tribute to a lot of the hard work of folks like Teresa and other people in our community here. But we'd love to see that number lower. So these are current use rates. So these are kids who say they've used in the last 30 days, which is why that number is substantially lower than those other stats we just saw. But still a lot of important work to do. So let's talk a little about why we care about underage drinking kind of as an issue, and what some of the challenges and concerns are. So I know over the years of the OASIS, we've had a lot of conversations about brain development and sort of the impact of putting any substance in a young person's body, and that those can have long-lasting impacts. And we know there's a lot of research that says that kids who use alcohol early in life, particularly before the age of 15, are 4 to 5 times more likely to have dependence issues later on in life. So we know that's not unconnected to marijuana, to opiates, to other issues, because they may be making changes in their brain. They're more prone to all sorts of addiction. But let's talk about consequences. So I think, Teresa, your end of the work with kids is a lot about consequences. So what are some of the kinds of things that can happen for kids who get involved with alcohol?
Well, when kids are using and abusing alcohol, their inhibitions lowered, and they can do, frankly, stupid things. Mm-hmm. And most of the cases that we have or quite often the cases that we have in court, kids may commit a crime because they're under the influence of alcohol. We also have a certain kind of case. The only case that we have on a criminal end that we have an adult in our court is called contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Mm-hmm. And that is a case where parents or adults can give alcohol to, when they buy or sell alcohol to children, they can end up on probation with the juvenile probation officer for that one individual crime. But I would say, I don't have the exact number, I think at one point it was 82%, and I don't know if that statistic is still good, of people on probation were involved in substances.
Okay.
And of course, the drinking and driving, that's always been an issue. And we have kids that are on, that have drinking and driving charges, and that can lead to tragedies beyond, people getting in car accidents, beyond just being on probation, but getting hurt or hurting somebody else while drinking and driving.
Right. And we know too with kids, with teenagers, and our data bears this out, is that adolescents, when they do drink, tend to not just have like a sip of alcohol or even maybe a drink, but they're binge drinking. So they're drinking substantial amounts of alcohol. They're attempting to get intoxicated. Yes. And so the likelihood of those kinds of poor decisions are significantly increased, as well as other health risks that they could be putting themselves at risk for alcohol poisoning, for fights, sexual assaults, all sorts of the kinds of things that are more likely to happen, like you had said, under the influence.
Absolutely. When you look at some of the sexual assaults, and the victims quite often have been under the influence as well, and it's just so sad. It's a terrible situation.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about parents and sort of what parents. So this is a tough issue for parents, because I think a lot of people think, well, it's just a rite of passage. You don't have a lot of control over it. Kids will be kids. They're just going to drink. It's what happens. And there's a lot of research about that, and there are a lot of things that we can do. And so I think when people talk about rite of passage, I always think about, well, most of our kids actually are not drinking. Most of our kids are making good choices. And so I think we don't want to assume that our children are making those choices, because we're setting them up with an expectation that we expect them to do these things, and so that's not really helpful for kids. But one of the things I always look at research and think about, what are some of the things that are our perception and what is reality. And so there's a fair amount of research about some of the kinds of messages that I think parents tell each other, or sometimes think with the best intentions, because of course we all just want to take good care of our kids and we don't want anybody to get hurt. So I think one of the first ones is, there's a myth that if we teach our kids to drink responsibly in our own homes under our control, that will reduce the likelihood that they'll have problems later on in life. And so, one of the pieces of research that I've seen that's pretty current actually is that underage drinking is underage drinking. So it doesn't really matter where kids have that drink. Their likelihood of having challenges with alcohol later on if they start drinking early are still the same. And it sends some mixed messages to kids about the fact that, oh, well, if mom and dad think it's not so bad, then they're more likely to then drink outside the home. So I think with the best intentions, when parents provide alcohol in their home thinking it's a safer environment, then kids think, yeah, they do that there, and then they go out and then they have more somewhere else with their peers. And you were talking about situations where parents are providing to minors as well. And so
again, this is a crime. You cannot provide alcohol to minors. You will end up in court. Again, in my court, the contributing to the delinquency of a minor. But again, the social host liability that parents take by letting children drink in their home. It's something I would never do, and I don't think people realize the gravity of it.
Right. And people are doing that with they think with the best of intentions. It's safer they feel like they're managing the environment, but you're right, they're putting themselves at risk legally.
Yes.
And it sort of falls back on that a rite of passage thing. The kids, if you think that they're going to go somewhere else and do it, we shouldn't assume that isn't necessarily what's happening if kids are getting clear messages. So another myth that I had read about that was actually related to this is that some parents are concerned that if they're very strict with their kids around their rules about drinking or using drugs when the kids are under their roof, so while they're in high school, for example, that when they leave the home and they go off to college or they go out into the world, whatever that looks like in a family, that the kids will go crazy because they'll have felt so restricted while they were living under the roof of a parent. And I know you guys do a fair amount of teaching with parents about clear rules and guidelines and how important that is, right?
Yes.
So I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
I mean, we have, as we're talking, I'm thinking about the different things that we've done through OASIS. And I think about when we used to do the speak outs. And we would talk to the kids. And kids actually want their parents to give them rules. Kids want to talk to their parents about the problems that they're having. Kids want the parents to say, this is not acceptable. They would tell us that time and time again. So that is something that we try to teach parents. You need to have this conversation with your child. You need to set clear ground rules. A lot of times, unfortunately in my court, a lot of people, we run a couple of parenting programs in my court. And one of the parenting programs is a program for parents who have lost custody of their children, and quite often because of substance abuse. And they're living clean and healthy lifestyles, but they have their children are returned to their custody, and they kind of carry some guilt for what their children have been through, being placed in foster care. And sometimes they can tend to spoil the kids and let the kids do whatever. And we teach them that is not the right thing to do. That you need to, you can't change what happened in the past, but you have to hold them accountable and teach them and live in the moment. And we teach them positive parenting skills, and we teach them how to be a positive parent for their children. And one of those things is through setting clear ground rules, and not only should the parents be involved with substances, but teach their children that they can't be involved in substances. And also there is a genetic component too, and if parents, their children are predisposed to becoming addicts themselves, and parents teaching them about that as well.
Yep, which is great. And I think, and I've heard that message too from other folks, that it's really important that kids actually know what their genetic history is. If they're predisposed to substance abuse, it's part of their medical history in the same way that if they are genetically predisposed to some other issue, that they can't, it's just sort of part of the package. They can't control for that.
It's a disease.
It's a disease. And so, but what a family can control for, or what a young person can control, and what hopefully the parents can control, is whether a kid has early exposure to alcohol or other drugs. So, just because you have family history of addiction doesn't mean you are doomed to have an addiction issue in your life. It means, though, if you have early exposure, you could increase your risk substantially. And so we always talk about, we want to reduce the likelihood that they use early, which means, like you're saying, clear rules and expectations. And it is a myth that if we're too strict with some of these rules, that kids will go crazy later on. So parents should feel good knowing that they can be strict while their kids are under their roof, and it's not going to have a bad impact later on. That is absolutely borne out by the research that they should do that. But that people need to be really clear, like you're saying, and they need to be the parent the peer necessarily.
Exactly. My least favorite line is when a parent says, my child's my best friend. They're not supposed to be your best friend. You're supposed to be the parent. They're supposed to be the child.
Right.
But one of the things that we do teach in the parenting program is that you need to spend time with your kids. And you need to do age-appropriate things with your children. You need to provide a healthy environment for them, but you need to have fun with them. You need to, and it doesn't have to be about a big trip to Walt Disney World.
Right.
It can be about taking a walk in the Blue Hills with your children. It can be about going to the park. It can be the simple things, but spend time, build a relationship with your children while they're children, and then they won't stray. And have positive things for them to do.
Right.
Talk to them about everyday things and talk to them about the big things.
Yep. And I think one of the simple things people can do, and you guys probably talk about this in your classes too, is simply having dinner together, right?
Exactly.
Is sitting together every night or as often as you can, because I know every night might be
right. Sometimes in my own family we have crazy schedules that even if we can do breakfast on the weekends, like anytime we can get in any kind of meal and sit around the table, it's the best.
Right. And it's almost like a family meeting, but you don't have to call it that.
Correct.
Right.
Both of our parenting programs, we provide dinner because we want to promote that. Not only do we want to, we provide a healthy meal so the families can model the healthy eating, but just it shows we provide childcare at the programs, but we all sit down together and eat a meal together. Hopefully they'll do that when they go home as well.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a really important piece, and people sometimes underestimate the power of just having that time to connect, share your schedules, talk about things that are going on, and creating that safe space for a child to have maybe a difficult conversation.
And I know, Steph, you're the data person, but I know there are all kinds of studies that say kids that have family dinners together, it lowers their risk of substance abuse.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. And it is a great place to have those conversations. And,
and it's fun.
And it's fun. Right. Like you're saying, or just playing a family game together and just hanging out and, and having some quality time. And I think the other thing, as we're talking about, we're starting to talk about how to have these kinds of conversations with your kids. So one is really creating that space by having regular family time, so that they know that they will have that time with you to be able to have that kind of a conversation. But the car sometimes is a good place to have that kind of a conversation, right? A difficult conversation where your kid is stuck.
They're kind of trapped.
Right. They're trapped in the car. They don't have to look at you.
Right.
And we know from talking to parents and from research that even if you think your teenagers are not listening to you, they are listening, and that having these conversations not once, as you're like flying by when everybody's on the run, but sort of repeatedly, and having an open mind and asking questions are really, really important.
Right, and age appropriate. You can start when they're younger, and you can tailor it as the older they get. You're not going to have the same conversation with the 5-year-old that you're going to have with the 15-year-old.
Right. And so what are some of the kinds of key messages when you talk to parents about, how do you talk to your kids about some of these things? What are some of the things you guys share with parents?
Again, clear expectations. I'm a court person, so I talk about the laws too, and this is against the law. We don't break the law in our family. Mom's a probation officer. We have to follow things, but that we talk about that, and I also talk about everybody has that uncle or that father, or everybody has somebody that has a substance abuse problem. I always kind of talk about that with my family as well. But again, spending time, and you talked about family time, and at my house we call it FFF, Forced Family Fun. And sometimes I have a 14 and a 16-year-old, and sometimes they grumble, but once we get out and we're doing it, they have the best time.
Right.
So sometimes when your kids say, I don't want to do that, make them do that. You're the parent, you can make them do that.
Right.
And once you're in it, they have fun. They have a good time.
Right. Great. No, I think that's absolutely true. And I think, just like you had said, continuing to be clear with your kids and remembering that you are the parent and you're not the friend.
Yeah.
But also I think it's important to let kids know if they're in a tough situation. So which happens, kids, they're teenagers, their brains are not fully developed. So we need to remember sometimes kids really make rash decisions, and when you ask them later, why did you do that? And they say, I don't know. They really don't. Sometimes they don't know because they're their body is sometimes moving faster than their brain.
Of course.
And to let them know that, I will always be here for you. I will always come and get you.
Yes.
I care about you.
Yep.
It doesn't mean there's no consequence.
Right. But I will come pick you up.
Right.
My son just recently got his license. All his friends have their license, and they have their junior operating license now. But it opens up a whole bunch of new scary things. And I tell them all the time, I will pick you up. Don't ever get in a car with somebody else that's been drinking. And you're right, there will be consequences, but not in that moment.
Right. In that moment, I'm going to come and take care of you, and then we will figure it
Exactly.
out. Right.
Exactly. Yep. And be clear when you do. I always tell parents too, always give a consequence that you can follow through with. Because if you start saying, you're grounded for 6 months, that's not a realistic consequence. And if you tell them you're going to do something and you don't follow through, then you become kind of a joke.
Right. So
and that starts again from this age to that age.
Right. So those are some parenting tips that people can think about when the kids are really little. If you make sure if you have a consequence is appropriate and you're following through.
Exactly.
Yep. And I think the other thing with alcohol too, as we're thinking about this, is so we know, as we were talking about, kids make sometimes rash decisions because they're teenagers, they're impulsive, it's part of development. That it's really important to keep alcohol really out of the hands of kids, and so a lot of the work we do,
prescription drugs as well.
Right. So any of those kinds of things, and I guess marijuana at this point as well.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to keep track of your alcohol, to keep it locked up. Teenagers shouldn't really be handling alcohol. They shouldn't be bartending for the grown-ups. You don't want it to be comfortable for them to sort of feel like, I can be around the alcohol. I don't need to be supervised. That can set up potentially some poor choices for kids later on. So really trying to be careful about all of those kinds of things, I think, is important.
And to lead as example, never drink and drive yourself.
Right.
Monitor your own drinking. You don't want to go overboard. If there's nothing worse than seeing a drunk mom or a drunk daddy. That's just model the behavior that you want your children to have.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of mixed messages in the media. We see all this stuff now. It's like mommy's little helper. So, the bottle of wine that you're supposed to turn to when you're stressed out, and that's how we all manage our stress, which is also not great modeling for kids. If we say the only way to manage and reduce stress, or the only way to have fun, is if alcohol's involved or we're intoxicated or high or something. And those are difficult messages for kids too, when we turn to them and say, but not for you.
Right. But approximately 6 months ago, I was going through a somewhat stressful time at work, and I got one of those books that said, the simple things in life. And I was just reading a book, and it was funny. I went to Ruth Pote, who spoke at the schools, and she was talking about good ways to show your children how you handle stress.
Yep.
So it was kind of nice that I actually did something, and then I heard that night that was the way to do it. So I was telling my daughter, I'm reading this book because I'm stressed out, and it's helping me calm down.
Right.
So it's good to show your kids ways like that.
Right.
Exercise, reading, meditation, yoga.
Music.
Yes, exactly. There's better ways,
Absolutely.
not the glass of wine.
Right. So let's talk. We have a few minutes left. I want to make sure we talk about some of the resources.
Oh, wow.
I know it goes fast, right? Some of the resources that the court has. So we've talked a little bit about some of your programs. I'm going to throw them up on the screen in 1 second. Hold on. I will put them up there. Okay. Maybe Jeff can throw those up so Teresa can explain what these are.
So the first program is SMART, and that's Shaping Mature and Responsible Teens, and that's a girls group that we have, and it's an 8-week program, and we talk about each week we have a guest speaker come in and talk about the topic of the week, and one of them is substance abuse. So we definitely cover underage drinking and substance abuse during that week. We also talk about healthy relationships, coping skills, anger management. We have eating disorder. So we have different subjects on that week. The next one is the Triple P Positive Parenting Program, which I talked about a little bit, and that's teaching parents positive techniques to use. It's myself and Probation Officer Tracy Cloa were certified, and this is one of the 3 parenting programs supported by the World Health Organization. And that's an 8-week program. 5 weeks are in the courthouse, 3 weeks are telephone consultations to see that the parents are using the tools in real time with their kids. The other program is the Empower program. That's a 12-week program, and again, one of the weeks is on substance abuse. We also cover pediatric well-being. We cover working with schools in the IEP system, working with the courts, stress management, how to manage your time. we have a different speaker each week on that. And the last one is CHAMP. It's a clean, healthy, and motivated person, and that's the teen substance abuse group where we have a licensed social worker and myself and probation officer Slavin come in, and we teach the kids about substance abuse, and this is an 8-week program.
Great. And all of these programs, so the contact information's on the bottom for folks who are interested. People don't need to be court involved.
No, absolutely not.
To take advantage.
Yep.
So these are some great parenting tools
Yep.
For parents that the court does offer for everybody.
Correct.
And then in the couple minutes that we have left, you want to talk about the other tools that parents who are maybe struggling can use to sort of bring the court in to help them?
So again, I kind of spoke earlier about it. It's called a CRA. It's a child requiring assistance, and a parent can come when they think that their child has a substance abuse issue, or if they're not obeying any of the rules, the lawful commands of the home. And they'll get a probation officer assigned to the case, and we go, we see the kids at school, at their home, at the court, and we're resource brokers. We know all the local resources. We refer kids to great places like the Stoughton Youth Commission and other local agencies. And also there's a Section 35, and this is when things have, the CRA is more a prevention, but the Section 35 is when your child has a disorder at this point, and if a drug or an alcohol disorder, and you can come to the court. Any person can come to the court who has a blood relative, a parent, a spouse, or even a probation officer, and that's when we mandate drug rehabilitation treatment.
And people
and
hear
that's
a lot
a civil
about
petition
that.
as well, yes. And since Charlie Baker changed the laws a little bit, my courthouse is in Dedham, but if you can go, so if you want to file a CRA, you'd have to come to Dedham. But with the Section 35, you can go to any courthouse. So a parent can go to the Stoughton District Court and file a Section 35 if they choose.
Okay, right. And I think people didn't always know that you could do that with juveniles.
Right.
People think about
Yes.
Section 35s with adults, but you can do that with a child that you're concerned about as well.
Correct.
Which is great. So any last thoughts or anything else, Teresa, that you want to share with us? I really appreciate that you've been here today, and this has been a great conversation.
Just, parents, you're not alone. You're not the only people that are going through this. We're open. You can come to the courthouse anytime between 8:30 and 4:30, Monday through Friday. We're here to help. There's no shame. We don't judge. The judge judges on delinquency cases, but on CRAs, there's no judgment. On Section 35, there's no judgment. And we're really here to help. We're a juvenile court. We're here for families and children.
Great, great. So that's a great resource that maybe a lot of families were unaware of, which I think is part of the reason that we do this show. And as always, if people are looking for additional information, you can find them on the OASIS website, which is www.stoughtonoasis.org. You can follow us on Facebook. We post a lot of the stuff that we have going on. All of the old shows are on Facebook as well as on Stoughton Media Access. And we appreciate your time with us today. And we'll see you the next time.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.